Anti-Climate Action Network, Tāmaki Makaurau, welcomes you to our July Hui Speaker Spotlight.
Share with us a little bit about 101 of carbon accounting, bit of reporting, offsetting, and some details about behaviour change. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Daniel. Kia ora, my name is Afshan Rajabpour. Today I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss briefly about carbon accounting and how it helps us understand emissions and take meaningful steps toward climate action. Let's start with the definition of carbon accounting. Simply put, it's the process of measuring and quantifying greenhouse gas released into the atmosphere from your business activities in accordance with the GHG protocol. When we talk about measuring emissions, we must know what we are measuring. That brings us to the several gases. Here is an interesting fact. Some greenhouse gases like methane have more global warming potential or heat trapping abilities, but they are less stable in the atmosphere because their molecular structures interact with other molecules and atoms, causing them to undergo chemical changes and eventually decompose. Of course, not on overnight. That's why they stay in the atmosphere for a very short time compared to CO2. On the other hand, CO2 stays in the atmosphere for a very long time. Think of it like a bad habit that never goes away. Once it is released into the atmosphere, it can linger for centuries. That makes this clayey gas the most critical and enduring greenhouse gas contributing to climate change. Now let's take a quick look to emission scope outlined by the GHG protocol. As you can see, there are three scopes for emissions. Scope 1, direct emission from sources you own, like your company's vehicle that run on petrol. Scope 2, indirect emissions from consumption of purchased electricity, like office lighting. Scope 3, indirect emissions across your supply chain. It represents up to 90% of your company's total emissions. We can dive into each categories, but Scope 3 include purchased good and capital equipment, business travel, employees, commuting, waste management, and more. At this stage, you may feel that it is unfair to your company to be held responsible for emission from sources that it doesn't even own. But it is exactly what about carbon accounting? Carbon accounting is not simply about measuring CO2 in the atmosphere. It's more about accountability, means which companies' operations and activities are responsible for the emission. Now let's explore how New Zealand law is shaping the way companies report their emissions. In New Zealand, large companies or climate reporting entities have been required to report their Scope 1 and 2 emissions from 2023. They must obtain limited assurance on the data from 2024. Reporting on Scope 3 started from 2025. Currently, SMEs and some government organizations are exempt. However, some councils, like Auckland Council, report their emissions because they are responsible for high emission sectors such as waste management and public transport. Now let's explore on how companies manage their emissions. One popular method is carbon offsetting. Carbon offsetting aims to balance emissions by investing in projects that reduce or remove an equivalent amount elsewhere. It's done through carbon credits. But here is the catch. Carbon offsetting allows us to emit now, clean up later, while the residual emissions remain unaddressed. It's like eating a double cheeseburger now and then go for a 10-minute walk and call it a healthy lifestyle. Another criticism about carbon offsetting is it often focuses on avoiding future emissions instead of removing existing carbon. Take deforestation as an example. Trees store carbon, but when they are cut down, that emission is released. While stopping deforestation is helpful, but it doesn't increase oxygen in the atmosphere. That's why stricter rules are emerging. For example, both Japan and Singapore emphasize that companies should only use carbon offsetting after they have made their efforts to cut their emissions. So in short, carbon offsetting helps, but it doesn't lead us toward achieving net zero emissions. So the question is, if offsetting is not enough, what is the real solutions in cutting emissions? Technology gets the spotlight, but the main game changer is behavioral change. Everyone, regardless of their role, can cut emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3. We can't afford to wait until a new technology being invented to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. So please leave your comfort zone and commute smarter. So your bike never complain about traffic. Statistics show that business travel has increased in New Zealand. If it is possible, cut emissions from business travel by replacing flight with a Zoom call. Then you only have to dress professionally from waist up. We judge, no judgment. Let's not forget something that is flying under the radar. These days, AI has helped businesses to move faster. But have you noticed the devil in the details? AI is highly energy intensive because the data centers powering AI consume vast amount of electricity. On top of that, to avoid overheating, the servers use water-based cooling that consume energy and produce wastewater that add to the climate impact. Now let's transition to physical waste. I believe that New Zealand has a great culture of converting trash into treasure. Let's build on that by reducing waste where it's possible, and when it is not, switching to low carbon materials to reduce emissions from waste. Remember, over time, more companies, regardless of their size, will be added to the list of climate reporting entities. All climate reporting entities will be under pressure to reduce their emissions, and one way is switching to green suppliers. Non-compliant SMEs risk being excluded from the supply chain. Let's step on the gas, but only to accelerate emission reduction and support our government in achieving its goal of 50% reduction by 2030. That's all from me. Thank you for your time and attention.